Hi, Gigi. Come share an apple with me. I picked it fresh from Granny Smith's sinister tree. Don't mind my stories, you'll soon see. They're as dark and disturbing as they can be. Murmurs of secrets, bloody sodden crimes, Granny's bone-quaking tales will twist your mind. You'll be hanging on my words from the edge of your seats. Now how'd you like to go dig up some bodies with me? So go grab a shovel and gather around, 'cause 8 feet under is where they'll be found. This podcast contains detailed discussions of real-life crimes, which may include descriptions of violence, sensitive subject matter, and other potentially distressing content. Listener discretion is strongly advised. The material is intended for mature audiences only and may not be suitable for children or those who may find such topics triggering. Hey, Granny's little grave diggers. Welcome back to 8 Feet Under with Granny Smith, where the tea is hot and the stories are cold. I don't know why I said that was so corny, but you know what? I kind of like it. I think I'll keep it. So, anyways, I don't really have any of my normal pre-story chit chat. So, I guess we'll just dig right in, yeah? Today, I've got a story for you. One that begins on a quiet street in Houston, Texas, back in the summer of 1965, where there was a house that smelled wrong, a refrigerator that held something much colder than leftovers, and a man who disappeared into thin air. So go grab your cup of coffee. I have mine here. I don't care what you say. There's nothing better than the sound of some iced coffee. You can't tell me shit when I have my pinky up drinking my iced coffee. Anyways, get whatever you need and go grab those bedazzled shovels so we can dig 8 feet into the story of Charles Rogers, a quiet geophysicist who disappeared after his parents turned up in pieces. Welcome to the Icebox Murders. Sources for today's story are a KDFW Fox 4 News article, the TexasArchive.org website, a Wikipedia article, and the rest will be in the show notes. Charles Frederick Rogers was born in Houston, Texas on December 30th, 1921. Charles was a smart kid. He did well in school. He liked books and machines. He wasn't really into the sports or hanging out with the neighborhood kids, that kind of stuff. He was bright, analytical. He liked to take apart radios just to see how they worked and then would put them back together, like with his eyes closed. People described him as a sweet, polite, yet distant child. He didn't really talk a lot. He didn't get into trouble. He kind of liked to observe from a distance. In 1942, Charles enrolled at Texas A&M University, but he dropped out, and then he enrolled at the University of Houston, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science in Nuclear Physics. He spoke 7 languages. He was a licensed pilot, extremely disciplined, and had a reputation for being quote-unquote odd but brilliant. So he was pretty much a genius. Oh yeah, and he was a ham radio operator. Now, if you don't know what a ham radio is, it's a system for wireless communication that allows licensed operators to talk across town, across the world, or even into space using radio waves. Some people do it just as a hobby, but it is a vital communication tool for emergency situations when other systems like cell phones fail. So I'm assuming maybe during like natural disasters or something, when normal lines of communications go down, you could use a ham radio. So Charles served in the United States Navy as a pilot during World War II. He also served in the Office of Naval Intelligence, and he joined the Civil Air Patrol, where he reportedly met an alleged conspirator by the name of David Ferry. Now, the focus of David's conspiracy was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. After the war, Charles landed a job with Shell Oil, where he worked as a seismologist. I think I got that when I'm a little confident. Anyways, he worked there for 9 years. And what is a seismologist, you asked? Because I damn sure looked it up. Like, I kind of had an idea, but I wasn't for sure. So I didn't want to just say it. Judge me if you want. Don't care. Argue with the milkman. Anyways, it's a scientist who studies earthquakes and the seismic waves that they generate. They investigate the Earth's internal structure and process plate tectonics using data from instruments like seismographs. Their work helps in understanding earthquake causes, predicting seismic activity, and mitigating hazards from earthquakes, tsunamis, and landslides. You're welcome. Moving on. So Charles randomly up and quit his job at Shell one day in 1957. He didn't give notice, didn't give a reason. He just quit. Friends and acquaintances say that Charles had a knack for finding gold, oil, and gas for the company he worked for. There was a little blue house at 1815 Driscoll Street, appearing nice, neat, and quiet from the outside, where Fred, Edwina, and their grown son Charles lived. But the Rogers family wasn't filled with warmth and laughter. The home was extremely strict and controlled. Fred, Charles's father, worked as a real estate agent who was known for his bad temper, and he had a reputation for being really tight with money. Now, the mother, Edwina, seemed to run the home, but not in a sweet, comforting, motherly way. She was said to be very manipulative, always keeping Charles under her thumb, even well into his adulthood. That sounds like a fucking nightmare. Neighbors say they hardly ever saw Charles, and when he was seen, he was shy and quiet. Other than a soft-spoken good morning, Charles was pretty much invisible. Just kind of a ghost fading into the background, I guess. He didn't even speak directly to his parents. It's said that he communicated with them by slipping notes under their bedroom door. Now we fast forward to June 23rd, 1965. Charles was unemployed and he was still living at home with his parents. Edwina's nephew, Marvin Martin, had been trying to reach her for days unsuccessfully, and no one was answering the door at the Rogers home. Marvin reached out to the local police, asking them to do a welfare check on the family. Officers went to the home, and again, no one answered the door. So they went in, and they immediately noticed the house was spotless, damn near too clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and nothing was out of place. However, what officers did notice was a smell that didn't belong. That heavy, metallic tang that hits you in that little dangly thing that swings in the back of your throat. It was death. The smell of death. I've personally never smelled death, but I'm damn sure I couldn't handle it. Anyways, officers did their thing and they searched the house looking for the couple, and they noticed there was food left out in the kitchen. Officer Charles Bullock opened the refrigerator, and inside were shelves neatly stacked with packages of what looked like cuts of meat, carefully wrapped and labeled. One officer thought it was pork. What have we learned about these stories, boys and girls? It's never fucking animal meat. The officer looked down at the vegetable drawer where he saw the heads of 81-year-old Fred Rogers and 79-year-old Edwina Rogers. The couple's other limbs were also found, neatly wrapped, and placed in the icebox. Officer Bullock states, quote, "Opened up a refrigerator and seen nothing but meat stacked in it. My partner standing next to me made the comment that it looked like somebody had butchered a hog. We didn't know it was a body until we got ready to close the refrigerator and we could see the head down in the bottom of the vegetable bin." End quote. It was clear that Fred and Edwina Rogers had been butchered in the upstairs bathroom. The cuts were done so precisely and clean, they were described as almost surgical. Officers found the couple's organs in a nearby sewer. It turns out they had been removed, drained, and flushed down the toilet. Investigators say the couple had been killed 3 days prior on June 20th, which was Father's Day. Now, the autopsy results showed that Fred had been beaten to death with a claw hammer, his eyes were gouged out, and his man parts were removed. Edwina had been beaten, then shot in the head execution style. So where the hell was Charles? Gone. In the wind. True crime author Hugh Gardner says, quote, "There was a massive amount of bleach that was used," end quote. He also states, quote, "I've never been able to understand how someone could commit an act like this and then disappear off the face of the earth." End quote. Neighbors said Charles left the house before dawn and then he came back after dark. They claim they sometimes heard strange noises coming from the home, like the hum of machinery, a saw, or maybe the sound of a radio transmitting late at night. When they knocked on the door, there was no answer. Since there were no signs of forced entry, no robbery, and nothing was missing except for 43-year-old Charles Rogers, the police quickly suspect he was responsible for the murder and dismemberment of his parents. But why? So glad you asked. That's where things get a little twisted and kind of out there. Friends of the family claim that Charles resented his parents because they were extremely controlling and manipulative, especially his mother, Edwina. There were strong suspicions that Fred was emotionally and financially abusive. Some said Charles believed that his parents had been stealing large amounts of money from his bank accounts. And side note, in previous cases that I've come across, when there's mutilation of the genitals or like breasts or anything like that, it's usually a sign that there was some form of sexual abuse. Now, there's no mention of that in any of these articles, but it just makes me wonder. Anyway, moving on. After the murders, investigators searched every damn where for Charles. Now, they did find blood leading from the bathroom to the bedroom, but it had been wiped mostly clean. Charles's car was left behind, and his job hadn't heard from him in months. So detectives revisited the scene again and again, searching and hoping for clues that they never found, and the case went cold. Sergeant Jim Binford states, quote, "Whether or not he killed his parents or didn't kill them, we'd like to know where you been and what you been doing," end quote. So there were these rumors swirling around that Charles was involved in some type of dark government work. Conspiracy buffs later claimed that he was a part of a CIA operation and that he was tied to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Sergeant Binford says, quote, "There's a wide range of theories, from satanic possession to evil government agencies," end quote. People were extremely unsettled by the disappearance of Charles. Some folks thought he fled the country. Others claimed he was hiding underground, literally working in South Africa or buried deep in the bayou. So as the years go on, the theories about Charles grew more and more wild and intense, far-fetched, but no one ever saw Charles again. There was no body and not one single verified sighting of him. Just no trace of Charles whatsoever. It's like he fucking evaporated into thin air. All that was left behind was a bloodstained keyhole and two parents cut into pieces. Charles Rogers became a ghost and a mysterious legend in Houston, Texas. The murders of Fred and Edwina Rogers became known as the quote-unquote icebox murders, and they left Houston shaken. If you don't know what an icebox is by now, it's a freezer. My grandparents, while I was growing up, always called it that. They never, ever, ever called it the freezer. It was always the icebox. John Craig and Philip Rogers published a book called The Man on the Grassy Knoll, suggesting that Charles Rogers had been a CIA operative involved in the Kennedy assassination and that he killed his parents because they discovered his secret. Now, this book also suggests that Charles impersonated Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City and that he and Charles Harrelson were responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, Charles Harrelson was a contract killer convicted for the assassination of Judge John W. Wood Jr. in 1979, and he was the fucking father of actors Brett and Woody Harrelson. That is a trip. I didn't know that. Charles Harrelson made a false confession of his involvement in the Kennedy assassination, and then he died of a heart attack in prison on March 15th, 2007. I'm sure most people know who Lee Harvey Oswald is, but some may not. So he was the man that was charged with the murder of President Kennedy and Dallas officer J.D. Tippit. But Oswald was killed 2 days after the assassination of Kennedy on November 24th, 1963, by a Dallas nightclub owner, Jack Ruby. Author Philip Rogers says, quote, "Charles Rogers was a covert agent of the CIA. He was recruited in 1956 here in Houston. At first as a contract agent, then when he resigned from Shell Oil, he became a full-time operative in Latin American activities," end quote. Philip also states, quote, "The motive for killing his parents was to silence them because we believe his mother, at least, found out he'd been involved in the conspiracy to assassinate the president a year and a half before," end quote. So naturally, people were divided over this theory. The conspiracy folks believed it was true, while others say it was a wild theory with no proof. Some even described it as quote-unquote baloney. In October of 2003, Hugh Gardeniers, you know I have to mispronounce something to make it a true episode. Anyway, Hugh and his wife released their book titled The Icebox Murders. Now, they believed that Charles had this entire thing planned out for years because he was tired of an abusive father and controlling mother. They also believed that the father, Fred, was a bookie who was involved in all this illegal gambling and fraud, and that both he and Edwina were these big con artists. Martha states, quote, "It was a life of alcohol and physical abuse and emotional abuse. He basically became a loner, but he was a brilliant person," end quote. So according to their theory, Hugh and Martha think that Charles had friends in very high places who helped him escape after the murders. They claimed he eventually made it to Honduras, where an unnamed witness spotted him in 1965. They think Charles was killed in Honduras over a dispute with miners. Martha states, quote, "He brought in mines, he brought in the wells for people, and they continued to make money, so they were not going to give him up. Some of the people he ran with in the late 50s and 60s were contract workers for the CIA," end quote. But Martha and Hugh say that they never found any real hard evidence of Charles being involved with the CIA. It's reported the Icebox Murders books has all these unnamed people like politicians and lawyers, and it is considered to be a fact-based fiction book. Now we have Sir Alfred Morris Van Fossen, also known as Gold Dust Ernie. He was a legend in the treasure hunting world, and he had mutual friends with Charles Rogers. Van Fossen states, quote, "Charles Rogers was a ham operator here in Houston, and of course he was down in Mexico and South and Central America, so he talked with a lot of people he had connections with," end quote. Van Fossen says he found Charles Rogers' ham radio after the house was torn down, and that he is almost certain that Charles and his associates had CIA connections, not in a permanent position, but as CIA contractors. When it comes to Fred and Edwina, Van Fossen says, quote, everybody that I knew that knew the mother and father said that they were devious con artists, end quote. So it sounds like they just were not nice people. Sergeant Binford says, quote, he was an angry man who never broke the umbrella of his parents, apparently until this event, end quote. So that little blue house of horrors on Driscoll Street stood unoccupied for decades before it was finally demolished in 1972, and neighbors claimed that they could still smell something off on a hot summer day. After the home was torn down, it was an empty lot until the year 2000 when some condos were built. Charles Rogers was never found. There was no confession, no closure, no real answers, just a mystery frozen in fucking time. 10 years after the Icebox murders, Charles Rogers was declared legally dead in July of 1975. Though Charles remains the only suspect in the murder of his parents, the case of Fred and Edwina Rogers is still considered unsolved. And that, my grave-digging friends, is the story of the ghost son, Charles Rogers, and the Icebox murders. Hold your britches. Don't freaking leave me yet. We have to debrief, like good profilers do. Y'all know how I feel about these unsolved crimes. Yet another one that will bug me until the day I die. Behind that big, brilliant brain, was there something else? Something dark and disturbing? Was Charles really working for the CIA and killed his parents because they found out? I know it seemed so fucking far-fetched, but at the same time, this dude was no ordinary Joe Schmo. Like, he was the Sheldon before Sheldon. So it could be possible. Or was he just sick of being controlled and abused by his parents? So he came up with a plan. He was a genius and he was very fucking disciplined. So really, he would have had the patience to meticulously plan the murders and then his disappearance. But if he did leave on his own, then what was the point of leaving the heads and limbs in the icebox, just neatly cut up and wrapped as if he was preparing a meal with the remains or something? Why do all that if you know you're leaving? Ooh, or could he have been set up for some reason? If he really was working for the CIA, maybe he wanted out. Or maybe he found out something he shouldn't have found out. So they set him up. I don't know. On the other hand, maybe Fred and Edwina weren't just controlling and manipulative with Charles. It seems like they were not good people. Maybe they pissed somebody else off or ran a con on the wrong person that came back for some revenge. Maybe Charles discovered their bodies and he ran because he knew he'd be to blame. Ugh. I hate being left with more fucking questions than answers. Anyway, what did we learn from this story, ladies and gentlemen? That it may not be pork and burger patties when you go looking through somebody's icebox, which is why you can't eat everybody's food. Anyway, as always, feel free to DM me with any story suggestions or your thoughts and theories on this mystery or any other stories I've covered. But until next crime, stay curious, but stay safe. And remember, an apple a day keeps the motherfucking murders away. Hugs and kisses, Granny Smith. Goodbye.